Oh, hey. So check it out, guys. It's been about a week since I filmed this video series. Straight through shot, and it's over 3 hours long. I decided to break it up into 3 parts. I'm just gonna throw this on the front of each of those segments. What you are gonna get on these videos is, if you're a guy who's interested in becoming a helicopter pilot or are a new helicopter pilot and you have some questions and are looking for some insights, then this video might give you some of those. This little series of videos might give you some of those. Feel free to leave the comments in the section below if you have questions or specifics. Hopefully it kind of paints a picture of what you can expect in the world of aviation from one guy's perspective. There's a million different ways that this can be achieved, and I'm not the guy with all the answers, but I thought that maybe this video, this little series of videos, might be somewhat helpful to some guys with some questions. So freaking noisy ass helicopter. Skidded helicopters, they're a little bit more tricky to land. They take a fair degree of finesse on the set down. But anyway, the last thing I want to say is about these videos, these opinions do not represent any of my employers, any of my companies I worked for past or presently. So that's a disclaimer that needs to be said. You know, ideally I would be able to post a lot more footage and videos and first-person view footage, but most all the companies you work for, you know, have privacy issues with that, and so they have a policy. So you got to kind of get exceptions and permissions to do things. So that's why it's kind of tricky to make much video content related to first-person view from the cockpit and things like that. But depending on whether or not I get an interest in that, I will try to consider to do so within the boundaries of my policies and whatnot. So that's what you're going to get. Check it out. If that's not your cup of tea, then you're going to want to skip ahead and skip to the next video. But thanks for watching, and leave a comment below. We'll see you on the next ones. All right, good afternoon, people. Jeremy here, and I am on the road to Portland, Oregon. It is March 21st. 3 weeks into March. It's a really nice sunny day out here, and I've got another probably 8 hours ahead of me of driving. So I'm following along the Snake River here. Snake River Valley is beautiful. I'm a little bit south and east of Boise. So I'm headed back to Portland, Aurora specifically, which is a small town south of Portland, about 25-30 minutes or something like that. And I'm heading back to my old helicopter company, Helicopter Transport Services. And I have a lot of time on my hands, still got a lot of daylight, and I wanted to tell a story about how I became a helicopter pilot and the course and the journey that it took to get to where I'm at today, because I get hit up pretty regularly through the social medias by folks that ask me questions, and I generally type out a really nice long email and answer a lot of questions and have a pretty good dialogue back and forth with guys that are just kind of looking into it, thinking about becoming a helicopter pilot, and or are just getting started. So I have been considering starting another channel dedicated to helicopter action, helicopter flying, and helicopters themselves all along, because it's a very specific topic, and there's a lot of interested people, and there's a lot of awesome content out there that could be created and enjoyed. So I've got about 2.5 hours of memory card there. And so this is probably going to be the longest story ever told. The longest story ever told on my channel. And I'm going to upload it to my main channel. And depending on whether or not I decide to start another channel, if I do, this will probably be the intro video, what kicks that thing off. So if you are a young guy or even an old guy, I'm gonna tell a whole story of all the people I've known and everybody that has flown and everybody that I know. And so if you're a young guy or an old guy or a new guy in whatever fashion, looking into helicopters, thinking about becoming a helicopter pilot, then you might gain some insights from this video. Otherwise, it might just be a long ass story that is of no interest to you. So if it is something that you find interesting, and if you have the patience to sit and watch it, that's awesome. Do me a favor, leave a like, subscribe, comment, engagement. It helps the channel and motivates me to try to kick videos out a lot more frequently. So, man, where to start? So, I'll start where I'm at now, and then we'll rewind all the way to the beginning. I'm 41 years old, and about 1 year ago, when I was 40, I landed the dream job. I've had several dream jobs, but I landed the ultimate dream job that was my ultimate objective in my career pretty much since the outset of my career 20 years ago. And that job is working for Intermountain Healthcare, for Intermountain Life Flight, currently in Salt Lake City. I live in northern Utah, and we have 5 helicopter bases at the company. We have 3 or 4 fixed-wing airplanes, so we've got a handful of fixed-wing airplane pilots on staff, and it is just an absolutely fantastic job, phenomenal job. It's a phenomenal company to work for. It is far and away a better EMS operation than, in my opinion, than practically anywhere else in the country. And yes, I'm biased, but we will get to the reasons as to why I feel that way throughout the story. But it's a phenomenal program. Absolutely stoked to be here. I'm just past my 1 year mark. I'm about 1 year and 2 months or something now. And super duper stoked. I love every day going to my job. I love the people I get to work with. It's always an adventure. It's always excitement. Living in Utah is a phenomenal place to live, as are many other places, but it has it all. And I just want to say that it's been worth it. It's definitely been worth it to get to where I'm at now. But my hell, it was a really, really, really long journey. And maybe towards the end of it here, I'll tell you whether or not I would do it again. Do it all over again. If I knew how long of a journey it was going to be, and the sacrifices and everything else I had to give up along the way, if I would still make the choices I did. Most recently, before working for Intermountain Life Flight, flying Augusta 109 SPs, Grands, we have some hoists on our aircraft. We have 2 hoist bases right now, and hopefully I'll be getting reassigned to a base that has a hoist in the coming year, in the coming couple of years. So I'm pretty anxious to do that. Hoist operations, rescue hoists in and around the mountains and wherever else around our state. And that's my next main objective. I just recently passed my instrument check ride, which was a requirement to get hired here, which I brought to the table, a fair amount of instrument experience, instrument flight time, but that was a requirement. And so that's been the objective up till now, over this past year, is just getting getting on track with the whole IFR operation. It's not too different than most any other IFR operation, but anyway, that's been the goal and objective up till now. Now I'm setting my sights on the hoist team, and it's going to be pretty badass. The aircraft we fly are top of the line, brand new. They're ordered straight from Augusta, and which is now Leonardo Helicopters, of course. And we do have a few other helicopters potentially going to be on order with Augusta. I'm always going to call it Augusta because I used to fly Augusta 139s, and so I'm always just going to call it that. Leonardo Helicopters is just kind of freaking silly to me, but nonetheless. It is a fantastic aircraft, fantastic operation. Maintenance crews are phenomenal. The facilities, everywhere we work is just top notch. So we'll get back to the light flight later, but the reason I'm driving all the way out to Aurora, just outside of Portland, Oregon, is because when I left my last job flying the Sky Crane helicopter for HTS about a year ago, a little over a year ago, it was without question the hardest choice of my whole flying career, because that was a freaking dream job without question. And so they did me so well during my first 2 years working at HTS, that I've felt indebted to them. In fact, I stayed on board almost a year beyond when I probably could have come to light flight, just because they had invested quite a bit of time in me, and so I wanted to make good on that. And when I had to leave, it was just so hard. I was so torn. And so as I got settled in here to light flight, a lot of guys I work with have side gigs and do firefighting in the summer and utility and this, that, and the other. And so it's like, dude, I'm going to go back and do that. So I stayed in touch with my bosses there over the past year. And sure enough, they're going to have me back. I'm going out there this week. Tomorrow's Monday. And try to get back on track with the Sky Crane and hopefully get my check ride knocked out by the end of the week. Hopefully earlier than that. And then I'll probably be on the road back home to Utah. So HTS has some pretty exciting news. They've got a lot of new contracts, a lot of extended contracts. They re-won some of their contracts, and so there's going to be a lot of work, a lot of firefighting, as well as they've got quite a bit of construction going on. Heavy lift construction, which primarily entails large power plant, smokestacks, power transmission lines, the big giant ones, wherever they set those up new, in the swamps and on mountainsides, any place that you can't really get a crane into very easily. So they got a lot of construction work as well. And they also have the 61 at the S61. And so they've got a lot of work, and I'm looking forward to going back and doing some of that part-time on the side. And hopefully I can juggle all this, and I got, several irons in the fire, and we'll see how long I can handle it, but I'm definitely willing to try. So that's basically a snapshot of where we're at right now. Rewinding all the way to the beginning here. Now, I've got a couple YouTube channels. Technically, I've got 3 other ones if I start this helicopter one. And so I should just mention and point out that, running YouTube channels and trying to make money as a little bit of a side gig, a side hustle on YouTube is freaking awesome. It's been an educational experience for me for going on about 5 years now. And what I know about YouTube and life in general, is just that if you know something and you're good at something and you can talk about a specific subject for a long time, and you want to build a YouTube channel around that, or an information source around that, a social media outlet around that, then it's good to stick to things that you know, right? And so even though I dabble in all these other things, I've been flying and been in aviation for my entire adult life. And so, maybe it's a good thing that I start this channel up and
Gives me an outlet to talk and hopefully answer questions and, communicate and give feedback to people. Because heaven knows I've been mentored by a long list of exceptional pilots, and I have a long list of exceptional colleagues that are of my same age group that it has been awesome to work with and get to know and develop and grow. A good number of them are still in the military, and actually a much larger number of them are not. So they're all civilians, but okay, so that's just kind of the setup for the video now. If you've stuck around this long, awesome. I'm not going to cut to a new video. We're just going to roll straight through. And I'll try to put a timestamp in the description to get you to this point, because this is the beginning of the story of how long it took and the great journey to get the dream job and have it, have the good life now. So in the beginning, high school days, I was an auto mechanic. My dad had an auto shop, and I was very much into auto mechanics. And through high school, I did auto mechanics, and I did some ASE, Automotive Service Excellence courses, and I was pretty much destined to be an auto mechanic. My dreams were to be a Toyota dealership auto mechanic, which is, it's a really good path. I have some friends that have done that, and later on, after doing it for 20 years, some of them decided to switch careers because, they kind of had enough. So that's where I started. So I had quite a bit of a mechanical inclination, you can say, early on. And so I always had a dream to be a helicopter pilot, because growing up in Utah, my biggest passion was board sports, riding a snowboard and a skateboard. I got a skateboard on board the car right here on our way to Oregon, because we're planning to hit up some skate parks. But, Transworld Magazine, all of the epic freaking snowboarding of A-stars dropping off people on tops of mountains in Alaska, snowboarders, that was the dream, man. That's what fueled my dream the whole time. Even from an early age, 15, 16, 17, I wanted to be a heli ski pilot, hanging out in lodges, meeting pros. I didn't really care about meeting pros, but just landing helicopters on tops of big-ass snow-covered mountain peaks. And all around the planet, or at least into Alaska, Canada, and the U.S. But sadly, even though I've been flying a long time, I've never had an actual heli ski job. And so whether or not I ever get to do that on the side, it's kind of yet to be seen. I've probably got another 25 years of flying ahead of me. I wouldn't say it's completely impossible, but I've got some friends, that do that stuff, and if I reach a point in life where I can pursue that on a part-time basis, whether it's in Utah or abroad, then, that's definitely something I might consider. So, this is going to be hard for me to stay focused. There's a lot of tangents I'm going to go off on, but that was the dream, be a helicopter pilot. So, I was working as an auto mechanic, about 18 years old. My wife and we were just starting our relationship. We'd moved in together, and she knew that I wanted to be a helicopter pilot. So I approached flight school in Ogden, Utah, at the Ogden airport, and talked to them about helicopters. And they were nice enough and friendly enough, but they kind of laughed me off and just was like, "Oh man, what you need to do is get an airplane license, because a helicopter license is super expensive. But if you want to go into aviation as a pilot, we could train you here in the on the little airplanes." And that really just wasn't really what I was talking about. So I still want to get my airplane pilot license. I have 2 hours of instructed time in a Cessna 150 that I got 12, 13 years ago. So I do intend to pursue that at some point, but it'll be kind of starting from ground zero practically as far as airplanes go. Fortunately, most everything in aviation translates over. It's just practically the operation of the machine and landing and taking off, of course. But everything else is pretty much goes hand in hand. So I kind of was pretty deflated from that, and wasn't really interested in pursuing airplanes. So there I was, having lunch at my wife's work across the street from the Ogden Airport, and these two Army helicopters came in together in formation and landed across the street, across the highway, and landed and went out of view. And it dawned on me, I was like, holy crap, why don't I... The military, you know, those are probably Army helicopters. You know, people join the Army all the time. I've heard all about, you know, how the Army and the military can give people a good start in life, and having a young family and a wife who has medical needs. And we were about to have our first son. It seemed like a pretty good thing worth checking out. So a couple days later, I called up on my lunch break from work at the auto mechanic shop, the recruiter's office, and talked to them and said, hey, you know, I'm 18 years old. I'm really interested in becoming a helicopter pilot. What can you tell me about it? And lo and behold, of course, the recruiter, he was only about a mile down the road from my work, was like, oh boy, come on down here and we'll tell you all we can tell you about going into the Army aviation. So the next day, went in and talked to him, and you know, this was back in 1999, so 22 years ago, and they have all the brochures, and they talk you through all the different military occupational specialties, the MOS. It's your job title. At the time, well, we'll get back to that, but they told me all about how I didn't even have my high school diploma. I barely had my GED, and in the time since, I did manage to get my bachelor's degree through Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. Finished that off about 3 years ago or something like that. And it was just one of those super long, drawn-out, procrastinated one course at a time over the span of several years. But fortunately, I got that to formalize my education. Can't say how much smarter it really made me, but it was definitely a rewarding process, and it had a good payoff, and probably helped me, give me an edge to try to land my job here at Intermountain. So yeah, I didn't even have a GED, and so they're like, well, there's no way for you to go into the Army flight training program right off the street. You wouldn't be a very good candidate, but if you enlist in the Army, then this is the path that you can take once you're in to pursue the Warrant Officer Flight Training Program, WOFT. And you don't have to have a degree to become a warrant officer in the Army. Practically every other branch, even the ones that have warrant officers, which I think is the Coast Guard and maybe the Navy, I think you have to have a degree. I don't know for sure, but so it seemed like an option. And you know, I had a couple different meetings with him, probably 3 different meetings. We went out to lunch. He was a super great guy, a straight shooter of a recruiter. He was a good dude, and discussed it over the span of a couple weeks with the wife and the family and everybody, and decided this was probably going to be the best thing, the best chance for us. And I was going to go in and enlist it as an E1 private, because with no education, you can't even join the Army as an E4 or an E5 or whatever, or even an E3. If you had some college or whatever, they would let you come on with a little bit of a higher enlisted rank, an E2, E3, or an E4. And also, when I got to basic training, I learned that a lot of people were joining the freaking Army and getting a $20,000 bonus. I don't know how often they do $20,000 bonuses, but they were handing them out to everybody, except for I didn't freaking get one. I'm going to try to watch the F-bombs on this so I don't have to bleep them out, but they're probably going to fly out. Anyway, so into the Army, ground zero. It seemed like the only way, but the nice thing was, like, as soon as I entered, I was going to be on this delayed entry program. It's going to be like 4 or 5 months down the road. from day one there, I'd have a paycheck, steady income, benefits, and a future. And from my personal background, which is a story for another time, I kind of had to claw my way up and out of some really, some serious hardships. A lot of people have to do that, but I had to overcome a lot of odds to achieve this. So didn't have a lot of prospects at the time, So there we were, about to join the military. Funny thing was the MOS that they assigned me to, or that I agreed to, was called an Avenger crew member, which practically was riding around in the back of a Hummer in a turret, an anti-aircraft missile turret. I was going to be a gunner. I can't believe that. I mean, now looking back, I can't believe that I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do that. Okay. You also have to keep in mind that these were the days before 9/11/01. These are the days before Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan and Operation Iraqi Freedom, which later on I ended up doing 2 tours in Operation Iraqi Freedom to Baghdad. But the most recent conflict that I had even been familiar with in my 18-year-old naive, stage of life was the Kosovo. I couldn't tell you anything that had happened in Kosovo. Prior to that, my only recollection of what had been a conflict was Desert Storm, Desert Shield, which happened in 1991. So it had been, and that was when I was in like 3rd grade or like 4th or 5th grade or something like that. I don't remember if it was 6th grade. Elementary school, I remember that. And so joining the military to be a warrior and a fighting, somebody who goes and fights wars on a back-to-back basis was not on my radar at all. And I give my hat off absolutely to dudes and ladies who, after 9/11 and in the years since, have stood up and said, by God, I want to go and defend my country and I want to be a warrior. I'm going to be totally honest, that was not my first priority. My first priority was creating a future for the family and trying to carve out a existence and a career for the days after the Army. Fortunately, before I signed up for the Army, the headmaster sergeant in charge of that recruiting station had formerly been a BlackHawk crew chief. And he was a salty old dog, and he's like, man, you're already an auto mechanic, you want to be a helicopter pilot, why don't we put you in as a helicopter mechanic, and then you'll at least be in the aviation, and then you can forge your path from there. And it was kind of a last minute thing, man. And that was a total godsend, and good Lord up above, who I believe in, was looking out for me, and otherwise, God knows what would happen. If I had joined the Army as an 11 Bravo, an infantryman, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have agreed to do that, but if I had, I probably would have had my lunch eaten, or they would have had me for lunch, and I just wouldn't have tolerated the nonsense games, mind-f***ery games that they put you guys through. Not so much the command or the Army itself, but the other people who are 1 grade above you, 2 grades, an E4, an E5 sergeant. It is brutal, or at least it was back in those days, because I ended up working with dudes that had reclassed out of the infantry to join aviation after their 4-year enlistment, who would become sergeants and whatnot, and specialists, and those guys were hard to break from their nasty habits of just treating lower enlisted like total garbage. And it was, it was pretty obvious when you get to basic training, when the cadre at basic training, especially during reception, before you reach all the drill sergeants, are all infantry dudes. They just treat each other like garbage. So I would have tolerated it up to a certain point. I probably would have snapped and blown up on somebody and probably been processed out. But aviation, on the other hand, was a total cakewalk in comparison psychologically. So there it was. I know it's a long part of the story to get to enlisting in the Army. Whew. or take a pause and get a drink. So let me pause real quick here. It's just as good a time as any to talk about it. Back in those days, the Army was taking a lot of people into flight school. It was a fairly common way to become a helicopter pilot. I don't know if that's the case anymore, and I think that kind of waned away a lot in the last 10 years, and it's harder to get in. There's just not as many opportunities, not as many spots. So maybe that's changed, and it's, you know, it's all cyclical with the military. So if it's an option for you, that's great. But if the numbers are so small, then it can be very competitive. And if you have a degree or part of a degree, or have ROTC, or if you're in the National Guard or whatever already, and then you have a leg up and you have an in, you're far and away farther ahead than coming off the street as an 18, 19, 20, 22-year-old with no experience. So it doesn't mean it's not possible. So point to make is just that I get asked a lot, people think about joining the military to become a pilot, and that for me was really the only way to do it. I didn't have money, and I wasn't going to qualify for any loans, because as far as I know, I generally tell people it's around $80,000 to get your helicopter pilot training done, and it probably will take you somewhere around a year, and that's give or take. Depends on the person, depends on the school, depends on what type of school. And so it just wasn't even an option for me. I had nobody to co-sign. There was not going to be any loans for me. So people ask me a lot, which would you recommend? Would you recommend doing it that way? Would you do it that way again? Well, for me, it was the only option. If the other way was an option, it's hard to say. It's really hard to say, because I spent 10 years active duty in the Army, 2 combat tours, with the 1st Cavalry Division. Initially, on my first enlistment, I was with the 4th Infantry Division out of Fort Hood. Both of my main operational companies or units were at Fort Hood, Texas. Everything else was training, TRADOC. And I wouldn't trade any of those days for anything. But if I had to go back, and if I was able to give my flight training without having to raise my hand and, swear to defend the Constitution, I might have done it. I probably would have done it that way. So what I tell people is, hey, if you've always wanted to be a soldier, and that really appeals to you, which is totally awesome, it's totally awesome being a soldier. But if that's not your primary objective, to go and serve your country and be a soldier and just be a helicopter pilot in the military, then you might be barking up the wrong tree. It might work out for you, but you might be sorely disappointed. So generally, as far as I know, at least back in the day, you have to commit to 6 years upon graduation of flight school. From the day you pin on your wings and you graduate from flight training. A lot's changed since 2003 when I graduated. God dang, can't believe it's coming up on 20 years, But, so 6 years, that's a 6-year commitment. If you manage to go right into the military as a pilot, you're at least going to give them 6 years. If you have to enlist first, then my aviation enlistment was 6 years as well. But once I was accepted into warrant officer flight training, it was congruent, meaning I only, of the 2 years or 2.5 years that I did enlisted, I didn't have to give the full 6. They just rolled that. They just reset it to the new 6 years because I was a commissioned warrant officer, not a commissioned officer. They still call it commissioned as a warrant officer, I think. And so, it's a huge commitment. It's not something you're going to be able to get in and get out of. And so by the end of your 6 years, the funny thing about it is, around 6 years, it takes you a while. It takes about 4 to 5 years to really master that aircraft. And I wouldn't even say master it, to get good at flying that aircraft. I was a BlackHawk pilot, best helicopter out there. I love Sikorskis. God bless Igor. And it's a phenomenally perfect helicopter. With the one exception of and I only ever flew Lima models. I never flew these fancy whiz-bang glass mic models, but with one exception is the tail wheel lock pin. It's too thin. It's thinner than my freaking pinky. So I think I broke one once or twice, maybe, but I had a nice key ring full of them, of all my co-pilots that broke them in one fashion or another. So they could have redesigned that, made it just one size larger. So it's designed to snap in case you land hard or turn or whatever, but it still could have been just a little bit stronger. Sometimes they get bent and jammed in there, and then you can't ground taxi because the damn tail wheel won't unlock. So you got to pick it up, hover, and do all that fun stuff. So aside from that, it's a perfect helicopter. And aside from the door handle arrangement, there's this teeny little tab that holds the sliding rear doors to the back. When you open them, it's this teeny ass little tab that pops up. And when these doors get old, they're so large from the top to the bottom that there's so much flex that the damn thing will separate and move away from that little latch, and the damn door will start sliding. So aside from those two oversights, perfectly phenomenal, perfectly designed helicopter. Tangent, I know, but it's going to take you a while to learn, and that's also going to depend on how many hours you get to fly. That's another big question. Is in the military, you'll be really lucky to fly. If you're not deployed to a combat zone, you'll be really lucky to fly 150 hours a year. Really lucky. Maybe that's changed. You'll have to ask somebody else who's been more recent, but 100 hours, you're not going to build any flight time in the military to get the job you need, to get the qualifications and the flight time you need to get a job on the outside. Unless you go on a combat tour, a couple combat tours. I think I flew 500 and 700 hours or somewhere around that on my combat tours on those individual years. And so without that, when I got out of the Army after 10 active duty years and 7 years as a pilot, I had 1,800 hours, which is a fair amount of time, but still it's kind of incompatible with a lot of entry-level jobs, which we will get to. So it's just going to be a ton of information. I don't know if you can stick around and listen to me babble on. Maybe it's for you, maybe it's not. Sorry if it's not. If it's not, you probably already popped smoke and bailed out of here a while ago. So if you're hanging around, well, thanks for sticking around. And just bear with me. Yeah, you're not going to build flight time, man. The best opportunity you have to build flight time is to become an instructor pilot or a maintenance test pilot. And you're not going to get to do that until you've been flying that thing for two to 3 years. So right around the time that you're getting ready to get out of the Army, it becomes super appealing to stay in the Army because you're about to become you're a senior W-2. Maybe you're about to pin CW3, and by then you're nobody messes with you, man. You're like the expert in your field. And that's a whole other story. And it's an awesome place to be, and it's really hard to walk away from the military. And a lot of my friends don't, A lot of my friends are retired or racking up some pretty high points or whatever, additional years beyond 20, so they can retire with a nice package. So the point was, you should consider going into the military if you want to make a career out of it. If you don't, I would not be disillusioned to think that you're going to get a ton of flight time, a bunch of experience, and then you're going to walk out of the military 6, 8, 10 years later and get a good job. And I'll tell you why and how that happened for me. It can happen, but I know dudes that have been in for 6, 7 years, and they've got 400 hours, 600 hours, 700 hours, maybe even barely breaking 1,000 hours. Okay, so for me, I lucked out a lot because the war kicked off. And with those 2 tours, I got some, phenomenal world experience, desert stuff, a little bit of mountain stuff, and big aircraft, which is all very relevant and which panned out for me a lot later on in my career because I had all the heavy twin engine crewed experience. So if that's not your shtick, it's not your deal, then you really might want to consider going the other way, if that's an option. So, there I was. I was the Army BlackHawk crew chief mechanic, and I'd been doing it from the time I got to my first unit. I started the application process, the Warrant Officer Flight Training Program application process, and that took me about a year to complete. There's a lot of background checks. It's a huge process. Little did I know that you can have the recruiter do that process for you over the span of a few months, and it can all be his project if you have some reasonable qualifications to bring to the table when you're trying out. Because when I got to flight school, there were guys that did come straight off the street, 18 years old, 19 years old. I was very grateful that I had about 2.5 years of experience, especially in aviation, so I could very much relate to the mechanics, the crew chiefs. We were all a lot better friends through that because I could relate. And just, I felt like it gave me a lot of insights and a lot more experience, and just set me up a lot better to function as a soldier and as a pilot. You just have your head wrapped around what's going on a lot better. But so it took me about a year to get the thing done, and I'm gonna lose my voice on this. Talk my ass off. There's a highway patrol that flipped a Huey. I guess he's in the median, but it's like one of these medians that's a big crisscross zigzag like that. So he's hauling ass, kicking up rocks and shit. Anyway, fortunately at the time, it was the early days of the internet, really, and so you had to submit this package, and then it had to go up for a board, and you had 2 chances to pass the board, and then I think you had to wait a year to reapply. So I met all the requirements, barely, with that GED, but everything else tested really. I had a really high ASVAB test, Army Flight Aptitude Test. No, it's the AFAS test. And I got selected on the first board, so that was freaking amazing. I felt so lucky. So sure enough, dude, I was going to go, and the dream was really going to happen. So the wife and I and our 2 young kids at the time packed up and headed to flight school in Alabama at Fort Rucker, and went through. It was about a year-long process, and initially you're learning how to fly the TH-67, Training Helicopter 67 in the Army. It's a Bell Jet Ranger. Might be a Long Ranger. No, they're Jet Rangers. Which is really cool. They're a glossy paint job, fabric interior. They're not an Army helicopter. They're civilian commercial helicopter, so it's pretty fancy. It's pretty cool. Very bare bones, very basic. So you learn primary in that, and then instruments in that. And then you learn some tactical stuff in, I did it in OH-58s, which are just Army green, OD green colored Bell Jet Rangers. And then I went into the BlackHawk, and I got super fortunate. It was the early days of what's called Flight School 21. I was like the second class, maybe the first class. It was the first 8-person class, I think, of Flight School 21 back in 2002. And I got real fortunate on that. I was pretty high ranking in the class, so I was number 8, I think, in the class of 40 or 50 of us. And so I got to choose between a Chinook and a BlackHawk. And being a BlackHawk boy, I didn't want anything to do with that hideous, ugly, goddamn flying death trap Chinook. They're really cool. They're really badass and cool to fly around in, but I just didn't want to pursue that myself, you know. They're cool. Any helicopter's totally killer, but I didn't want that. But I was just most grateful that I didn't have to choose, or that I wasn't pigeonholed into this Apache, because the Apache's a badass helicopter, no question about it. But my personality, I just did not want to be, you know, shooting live fire gun ranges. That's awesome. Blowing up targets and shit. Sounds like a great time. Going overseas and blowing up objectives with people in it and having those memories flash through your mind for the rest of your life was not something I wanted to take part in. So I was super stoked. Got to choose a BlackHawk. You know, it was maybe 2 or 3 months worth of BlackHawk training, and I think I had about 80 hours, which before the whole Flight School 21 program, no, I take that back. It was more like 40 hours. Before the Flight School 21 program, 40 BlackHawk hours. Most people would get the transition into the BlackHawk after all of the bulk of flight school, and they would show up at the unit with like 10 hours. Super bare bones, bare minimum. So that was the benefit of the whole Flight School 21 situation, was bringing, you know, as the war had already kicked off at that point, bringing brand new dudes out of flight school to the unit that would require minimal, still a pretty extensive train-up process, but substantially less. So there it was. It was, you know, when I was an enlisted guy before flight school, 9/11 happened, and I remember pulling into work that day at the hangar and parking the car in uniform, the whole deal, and somebody coming into the parking lot with me to go in the building was like, we're getting attacked. They flew an airplane into New York, or they said something like that. I was like, what are you talking about? And in my mind, I was like, I'm just imagining a little Cessna, you know, flying into some building in Dallas or something, Texas. Because, yeah, that's where I was at, Fort Hood, Texas, right? 1st Cavalry Division. Largest U.S. military installation on the planet, I believe. Some freaking darn near 100,000 soldiers. 2 mechanized infantry divisions, meaning M1 Abrams tanks, Bradley fighting vehicles, Apaches, and all of the mechanized infantry instead of ground units or airborne infantry like 82nd Airborne or 101st Airborne or whatever. So, Fort Hood, Texas. Tangent, sorry. But, so 9/11 had already happened. While I was in flight school in 2002, we invaded Afghanistan. And in fact, I think we might have invaded before I went to flight school. I think it was early on. But while I was in flight school, just toward the ends of graduation, Fort Hood was coming down on orders. All the big divisions were coming down on orders to go to Iraq, because the 3rd Infantry Division, I think, was the first invasion force in 2003. And so, holy shit, there we were, man, going to war, right? So I graduate, transition back to Fort Hood, the same base from which I had come a year, 14 months prior. And we were on orders. This was like 8 or 9 months later. We already had our orders. We were on orders to go. So in the span of that 8 or 9 months or whatever it was, I had my 3rd kid. My wife had him. And he is now just about 17, so if you're sticking around this long on this story, I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry for all these personal tangent things, but you know, it's a lifelong story, so skip ahead if you get too bored. So get to the unit, get the train up. And it takes, even with the Flight School 21 dudes, the fastest I would say was probably 15 flights. You know, when you got a whole slew of other dudes trying to get trained, it could take a while, you know? That's probably the fastest. And it could take 20, 25 flight training periods to go out there and actually check off all the boxes and demonstrate that you can do every one of the maneuvers. A lot of the guys were coming and they were showing up out to Iraq and getting trained up over there. So, boom, there we were, man. We deployed and went to Baghdad. And this was about 1 year mark after the invasion. So it was 2004. And so the whole place was still a mess. It was just a wrecked battleground, you know. There was just blown up tanks and blown up Iraqi equipment and blown up bunkers and just every sort of freaking madness you can imagine. And our mission was to fly all around Baghdad, basically transport people all around. We were delving into air assault operations, and we were the 1st Cavalry Division, 1st Air Cavalry Brigade. So we hadn't done, you know, the units hadn't done a lot of air assaults for a long time. I think the 101st Aviation Regiment or whatever had, you know, I mean, they're the freaking go-to guys for air assaults, right? Historically, they've had like 30, 40 ships or some shit. Enormous freaking air assault missions. You can look up the footage and shit online, but so 1st Cavalry Division was we were kind of trying to figure it out as we went, as well as doing a lot of what they call ash and trash. Just flying people around, doing whatever, flying Iraqi dignitaries around, this, that, and the other. And it's pretty exciting. Had some pretty gnarly close calls. Quite a bit of action. Okay, and then I redeployed, came back home, and sure enough, within about 15 months, it was definitely less than 2 years, maybe 18 months, we were on our way back. So it was 2006 when we went back, and in between then, we got brand new helicopters. We got a bunch of brand new helicopters, not all of them, but we got a ton of new equipment, new weapons, new door guns, new Hummers. The freaking defense budget went through the roof, and we cashed in, man. Everybody did. It was nuts. It's night and day difference from the first deployment was like sandbags and steel plates scabbing together armor for our Humvees. Rusty steel plate with a torch sitting on sandbags and the floorboards, to on the second tour, proper up armored, you know, $150,000. No, they were probably a lot more than that, with armored glass windows and shit all around. So it's a different story. Went back, had another super exciting tour. This time we focused a lot more on air assaults, and we had 3 flight companies, and so we were on a rotation. It was somewhere around 2 weeks or a week maybe. It was about 2 weeks probably, maybe 10 days. I don't remember what it was. We would be on the night shift, and that was the air assault shift. And then 10 or whatever, 14 days later, we would switch to the day shift, and that was kind of the ash and trash all around Baghdad and all around the country, just hauling people that were coming into the country, taking them out to all of their forward operating bases. And then 10 days of that, we would do swing shift, where we would do afternoon ash and trash around, followed by early evening or early night air assaults. And then we'd switch back to nights and do full air assaults all night. And that shit was intense, dude. Typically we would do 4 BlackHawks, and each BlackHawk can carry 11 troops on average. You can fit a couple more in there with seats if needs be, but we always put 11 on. So we would assault a objective with about 44 troops, and typically we would go back and pick up a second sortie and bring 44 more. So freaking 88 troops or more. Massing on an objective, some sort of complex, compound, building, apartment building, farmhouse, whatever the case was, and it was intense, dude. You got 4 helicopters trying to land in dusty environments at night under goggles, negotiating around high-tension power lines. Farm country, every sort of... We didn't do a lot of urban stuff, but we did like rural area stuff that had buildings and stuff all around. We weren't doing like fast roping and shit over top of, the buildings downtown or anything like that. We did have fast rope bars and stuff installed in our aircraft, but I never used any. Fast rope is different than rappelling, obviously. Fast rope's a big ass rope that just hangs off the side, and then they just slide down like a fireman's pole. And then once you're ready to go, the crew chief in the back just pulls a little handle and the whole rope falls. It's a big ass braided rope, about that big. Then they just, the ground teams go and recover it later, bring it back to the unit. So it's not like we give those things away. They're pretty expensive. I always wanted to hang on to one. Freaking badass. But great tug of rope war, tug of war rope. So it was freaking high intensity, dude. High intensity. And a lot of close calls, a lot of operational close calls, close proximity, almost crashing into each other, almost crashing into obstacles, getting shot at. We didn't get shot at a ton, but enough to keep it interesting. And what was most dangerous there was we were at a base just north of Baghdad, and we got hit up by incoming rounds of small mortars, large mortars, as well as rockets and freaking IEDs and every other sort of shit. I mean, it was freaking deadly, dude. I had 2 instances where shrapnel would have entered my room, my quarters where I was at, but it was saved by a HESCO barrier, a dirt-filled chain link barricade fortification, and sandbags. Anyway, a lot of close calls, a lot of incoming rounds, and it was gnarly, dude. It was gnarly. So towards the end of that, came home, and I got another assignment. My last assignment was going and being an instructor, and that was pretty awesome. Getting to train and teach people how to fly the BlackHawk. And, I was still a freaking young dude, I was like 28 years old or something. It's kind of crazy to think what responsibilities they give you when you're a young man in the Air Force, whether you're an Air Force freaking F-16 or a jet fighter pilot, Apache pilot, whatever. It's like kids, freaking kids. It's nuts. Man. So, there we were, 2 combat tours back to back, got out, and we moved back home to Utah, where I wanted to raise our family and return them back, my kids, my 3 kids now at this point, which were about 10 and 7 years old, and bring them back to their cousins and family, because Utah is just a phenomenal place to live and grow up and raise a family. And that's a hardship that we all endured for those 10 years being in Texas and elsewhere that was really, really difficult, let alone the hardships of the combat tours as well. So the time finally came, 2000. The year was 2010. I got out, 10 years active. So now, next timestamp,